Yes, beautiful. This is extraordinary what's happening here. We all together, communicators, journalists, citizens coming together to protect and to expand the civic space. I say extraordinary on purpose because very often we use the language of war in the world to communicate, fighting misinformation, capturing attention, defending positions, targeting audiences. And we also use a lot the language of sport, winning hearts and minds, playing to our strengths, chasing big goals. And I think these metaphors, they shape how we think and they shape how we act. And they can bring a sense of urgency, yes, but they also can limit us. They make communication sound like conflict, like competition, when in truth, what we do as communicators is connection. So, what if we changed the vocabulary? What if instead of war or sport, we spoke the language of magic, language of possibility, of courage, of connection, of transformation, curiosity? Communication is not about winning or defeating. For me, communication is about creating. Every story that moves someone makes the invisible visible. It has the power to turn civic space from an idea into something human, emotional, alive. Now, we cannot deepen the conversation without mentioning you, the ones who make the world extraordinary, the ones who defend freedom of expression, association, assembly. You are the people, you are the ones who counter the misinformation, who build solidarity, amplify the grassroots voices. So before we go further, I would like to know how you're feeling. And for that, I'm going to ask you to use your thumbs. We call it the thermometer. If you're feeling great, thumbs up. Not so great here. And maybe, yeah. Oh, lots of great energy. Thank you. Because if you look at me, actually, I need to make myself very vulnerable here. My energy is not good today. You see on my t-shirt, 0. And this brings a problem. What happens when we are in charge of bringing the energy or communicating, of enlarging the civic space, and our energy is down? We need help, no? So I need a bit of support, a few hearts on the screen. But I also would like you all to think about a magic word. And maybe if you could enter a magic word in your language in the chat, I would like to see lots of different magic words from all possible languages. Let's see what comes up when we think about magic words. For me, like I come from Brazil, I'm Portuguese speaking. So we use abracadabra. Yes, we use a lot of abracadabra, Shazam, Simsalabim. Empathy is a beautiful one, Prabesh. Thank you. Zauber, Anja. Aitma, tada, sumut. Hello, love, curiosity. Yes, lots of beautiful words. For the purpose of this magic trick here now that I want to show you, or this magical little moment, I would like to use abracadabra. And the reason being, abracadabra comes from the Aramaic. And if you say avra, means I create. Cadabra means as I speak. So when we all say together abracadabra, we are saying we create as we speak. And this is incredibly powerful. So the way this is going to work, I'm going to turn around, I'm going to breathe in, I'm going to count 1, 2, 3. And on the count of 3, you all say together abracadabra. And if you cannot say, you just put in the chat. Okay, is all clear? Tanya, good? Ready to go? Let's go, huh? 1, 2, 3, and
Abracadabra.
abracadabra. And you see, listen for the magic. It's calling you. Abracadabra. So I ought to say that words, they create worlds. And that's what you do every day through your campaigns, through your stories, through your actions. So introducing myself a little bit more, I'm Rubens. I'm director of spells at a company called Abracademy. Abracademy works in the realm of culture, changing culture, help teams, organization, communities think in different ways, look from different perspectives. And my day-to-day job is to create magic and also help people, communities, and organizations dispel out their magic. So I'm both a facilitator and a magician, and Civicus is a great collaborator. We work together for some time. It's a pleasure to be here. Today, I want to invite you to challenge how you communicate, because creativity is how we expand what's possible in the civic space. My way of doing that is using magic, and I would like to share a little more with you. Starting with these numbers here, I have a dice. I'm going to throw the dice, and I want you to think about a number between 1 and 6, each one of you, right? And on the count of 3, you mentalize your number. I'm going to throw the dice, okay? Everyone, 1, 2, 3, and here it is. Lots of possibilities, right? And the point I want to make with this is that sometimes you expect that, yeah, maybe I'm not going to be lucky. This is not possible. But there are other ways. We can enhance, we can create our luck when we are looking with our attention in the right place. So this is the first message I would like to bring to you. And the second one, I would like you to see these two boards here. Yeah. And I'm going to put here this on top of this one. And I'm going to bring this table a little bit up, just a second, so you continue to see this. There's always a bit of logistics in magic in terms of keeping things where they should be. Yeah, all clear? Let me put this up. And you know, David Copperfield, a few years ago, and I have this one. Can you see transparent here? My fingers? Yeah. David Copperfield, a few years ago, he made the Statue of Liberty disappear. And I think that was a great magic trick, but I think today we need to do something very different. We need to make it appear, right? We need to remember ourselves and not take freedom for granted. So I'm going to put this in front here, my transparent little box. You can see here the thing. But now we all together are going to say the abracadabra again. And hopefully, because we are all people who defend the civic space, something beautiful happens. On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, and
Abracadabra.
Abracadabra. Ladies and gentlemen, if you look well, here it is. The Liberty Statue to remind us that freedom, let's never take it for granted. Thank you. So I would like to ask you, when you watch magic, when you see magic, if you could put in the chat, how do you feel? What kind of emotions, what kind of feelings, what kind of questions come to your mind? Let me see. Joy. Yes, thank you. Fascination. Yes. Happy. A miracle, but possible. Wonder, freedom, playful. Wow. Yes. Excitement, confusion, complexity. Thank you, Jax. Serafel, influencing, astonished by time. Yes, thank you. There is this mix of surprise and joy and curiosity and the feeling of wonder. There is this Spanish magician, Amilcar, and he says that magic is the emotion caused by something or someone that directly challenges our intellect and produces wonder. So when logic fails to explain what we see, our mind enters a gap, the how did that happen moment. And this gap is precious because it's where curiosity begins. Abracademy calls it the wonder mindset, the courage to stay open when we don't know all the answers. The truth is that magic interrupts certainty, and that interruption creates curiosity. Yeah, and this is the spark that draws people closer to new understanding when we become curious. So my question to you is, can we, as communicators, interrupt certainty? You know, when people are in their way, certain, so certain, can we invite others to imagine and build a bigger civic space? I know that in our world, uncertainty is uncomfortable, But fear and misinformation, they rush to fill that space. But curiosity invites us to stay with the question longer, to listen, to explore. Even if you know the answer of a question, sometimes you stop a little bit longer and say, is there something there different here? So we can co-create meaning. Curiosity is a powerful way to keep the civic space alive. And today I want to talk about 3 dimensions. The first dimension of curiosity is quite philosophical, and it starts by being curious about yourself. We need to make sense of the world, but we also need to make sense of who we are in this world. So imagine each one of us has this magic mirror. And when you look in the magic mirror, you don't just see your face. You see the stories you tell yourself about who you are. Being curious about yourself means asking, what kind of person do I want to be? What do I believe in? Do my beliefs hold, or is it a time for me to change them, to look at them again? What might I want to change? What might I want to learn? Because when we look honestly at both our good sides and our mistakes, we find the freedom to grow and do better. And when we are honest with ourselves, people trust us more. It's like leading from the inside out. And that trust helps make the world a better and freer place. So my question to you, if you had to choose one personal strength that helped you this year, what would it be? If you could type it in the chat, let's see the strengths in this room. I imagine all sorts of strengths, very curious. I would say that mine is curiosity, stubborn hope. Yes, Rasha, thank you. Resilience, Hannah. Pat's persistence, family, discipline, Natasha. Idealism, optimism, beautiful. Hope, so important. Adaptability, comedy, openness, peace, patience, protest, solidarity. Wow. Learning, positivity, courage. Thank you. And I ask in curiosity because the second dimension is curiosity about others. We don't communicate at people. We communicate with them. Empathy isn't just kindness, it's perception. It's the art of stepping into someone else's experience long enough, not like in and out, long enough to see the world through their eyes. So my invitation is, ask yourself, what do they care about? What symbols move them? What are their dreams? When we know people's dreams, we can create wonders together. And curiosity about others turns the strangers into allies. It's how communities grow stronger and how civic space expands from the inside out. So perhaps think of one person or group you would love to reach more deeply. And what's one way you could show genuine curiosity about the world this month? And the third dimension, last one, be curious about the broader civic space, about the world. The world's changing fast, very fast. Technologies, movements, new voices rising that we rarely hear. Curiosity keeps us awake to that change. It reminds us that knowledge is alive, it's shared, it's evolving, it's collective. So ask yourself, what's emerging that could amplify our stories? Who outside our usual circles could join our message? And how can we use new tools in favor of freedom, in favor of this precious civic space? So perhaps you try one new format, one new partner, one new language, one new channel. That's how our narratives stay alive. That's how they stay relevant and reachable. When we are learning, we don't become obsolete. When we are learning, we feel free. To stay adaptable, we need a little alchemy, a magic potion for curiosity. So there are 5 ingredients. Self-awareness, so begins with yourself, the mirror that tells the truth. Dropping assumptions, so question what you think you know, welcome the unfamiliar. Solidarity, remember you're not alone, so build alliances, share light. Self-compassion, rest is resilience, recovery is part of the spell, right? We need this well-being. It's a lot of pressure. And humility, Look at everyday things with new eyes and ask what I am not seeing. And if you mix them often, they will keep wonder alive and civic space open. That's your potion for staying courageous, curious, and creative. So thank you very much, and very nice to meet you all. Back to you, Tanya.
Thank you so much, Rubens. As always, it's always such a pleasure having you, always exciting and having that good energy and wonder and joy. So thank you for joining us. I've seen a couple of people asking more about Abracademy, so please feel free to share your contact details and how everyone can get in touch with you in the chat. Thank you so much. So actually, as a part of the next section of this meeting, I will be sharing about our convening in Latin America, where we had the pleasure of having Abracademy be the facilitators of the convening. I'm just waiting for my screen to load, and I'll start. I'll put it on full screen. There you go. Okay, why is it going there? Let me just scroll quickly. Yes, so in July of this year, we did come together. As you will see, Rubens is right there, and myself. So we came together in Bogota, Colombia, for our Latin America convening of the Communicators for Civic Action. We spent 4 days together in one space, and it was a great opportunity for us to connect and learn and share with each other. So just to quickly go through what the purpose of this convening was, it was to bring together communicators and journalists, civil society advocates, social movements, content creators, individuals, who are passionate about communicating about civic space. And we were looking for communicators and actors that are in Latin America because we wanted to understand more deeply what the existing narratives were in the region, or currently are too, and also what the capacities are for us to strengthen communications and narratives around civil society, but also what the challenges are that communicators face in being able to effectively communicate about civic space and also show the impact of civic action. And so also a big part of this was to strengthen our capacity. We brought on, you'll see Jocelyn is on the call and she'll also be speaking a bit later, but we brought on communication experts. We had a media communications consultant, as well as a digital communications consultant who was helping the network build capacity to design and also implement narrative strategies as well as campaigns that will help amplify grassroots voices and also strengthen narratives around civil society and civic action. And then what was also important to us was also that we needed to create a safe space for communicators to have that solidarity and support. And we found that a lot of times communicators work in isolation, especially in grassroots organizations. So it is important for us to create a community that can depend and rely on each other and lean on each other, share and learn from each other. So we had an exciting 4 days of convening in Colombia, guided by Abracademy. And so what we did over the 4 days is that we explored, cognitive biases, the power of perception, and our shared purpose, and covering and like common ground between all of us. And then also what is important for us on the very first day was building that trust. And in order for us to feel comfortable to share, we need to trust the people that we are around. So that was very key for us in creating this community. We also focused on learning and we delved into strategic storytelling, narrative frameworks, and digital tools shared by our experts, Jocelyn and Leandro. And they were sharing some tools that we can use. And we also even explored how we can use AI prompt design for furthering and bettering our communications and campaigns. And towards the end of the week, with some of the support from our facilitators on board, the participants were able to design bold campaigns, and these ranged from youth-led festivals to immersive reality experiences, virtual reality experiences, with the aim of humanizing human rights defenders and as well as amplifying civil society voices. And so by the end of the week, we embedded and celebrated our journey. And we did this by reflecting on our collective purpose and, also emphasizing our commitment to the rituals that we want to keep to sustain the community. And so next are some of the key learnings that we gained, some of the insights that we left with from the convening. And one was that, strategic storytelling is not a luxury. We don't do creativity and innovation because it's only, well, I mean, it is really fun, but it's not only because it's fun, right? But it is an act of resistance. And it's so important that we ground our stories in reality, and that they are focused on the values and the dignity of those that we want to communicate on behalf, or ensuring that those voices are reflected in the communications. And also, as I touched on before, we also learned that communicators work in isolation. A lot of grassroots organizations don't have the capacity to have big teams. So it's usually one person who has the pressure of communicating on behalf of the organization or the advocates or the human rights defenders that they are communicating for. So there's a lack of, strategic tools, digital resources, and also that community support. And then we also found that there was a huge need for peer learning spaces that are very focused and tailored to the context where the communicators are. It isn't just only about skill sharing, but also about creating that community, learning from each other, learning from each other's experiences and challenges, and then also how we can effectively counter using each other's skills and, sharing those skills amongst each other. And to this was also mentioned, the importance of language. So when we are communicating and bringing together communicators, being able to communicate in languages people feel comfortable in, and also that resonates with the communities that they work in. And lastly, and I think also most importantly, and I think Nipuna touched on this a bit earlier on, was we need to transition from being reactive to proactive, especially in the context that we're living in and shrinking civic space. We cannot wait for something to happen for us to react and then communicate. It's so important that as civil society that we shape the narrative ourselves. Therefore, we have the power in where it goes. And instead of us waiting for something to be said and then we counter it, what happens is that we end up staying in this negative cycle of communication and just countering and defending something that's negative, rather than it being us that's promoting and shaping a positive story. So after the convening, like I said, there were some bold campaigns that came out. And so one that we decided to push with straight after the convening was the campaign for This Is Democracy. So together with the network and the cohort that we created in Latin America, we launched the This Is Democracy campaign for International Day of Democracy. The campaign reminds us that democracy is alive in the small and everyday actions. Jocelyn was also a huge part of this campaign. And that these actions, democracy does not have to be something that is distant or a concept that is so far away and only practiced every couple of years when there's elections, or practiced when there's a policy that needs to be spoken against. But it is in everyday actions that we take as people. So this can come from, this is, as simple as saying, I disagree at the dinner table, or listening to someone with opposing views, amplifying diverse voices online, joining a community action, or defending someone who is being silenced. So through the campaign, we encouraged people, our members, and the general public to share their actions for democracy, what democracy means to them. And we provided visual assets that were easily accessible and adaptable, and ready for anyone's use and amplification, also ensuring that they were available in Spanish and English for more diverse use. And so we found that by allowing participants to adapt these assets and being able to use them and share and input their own messaging, we were therefore sharing the ownership of the campaign, and therefore it's no longer Civicus's or the Communicators for Civic Action, but everyone who decided to participate in the campaign, it becomes our campaign because it becomes all of our stories. And in turn, we are able as Civicus and our network to amplify the stories of those who participated in the campaign through our channels and wider reach, and hopefully wider impact. So looking at the time, I see up next we have a break. I think we're doing incredibly great on time. So let me just check here what the agenda looks like. But I think we're doing great on time. So we will go into a 15-minute break and then come back at 11. Hopefully that's not too confusing for your time zone, but we'll be back in 15 minutes. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Let's see if everyone is back. In the meantime, okay, I see some thumbs up. Glad to have you back, and I hope you were able to grab a little water, some coffee, some tea while you were away. So we're going to go into the next session of the agenda, which is a little activity just to gain your perspectives and understand the narratives that exist within your space and some of the challenges that you experience, but also the possibilities of us countering and shaping our own narratives. I'll be sharing my screen. So we'll go back to the Slido that we previously used. Let me just quickly share my screen. So if you do not have access to the Slido, you can join using the QR code here on the side. So the first question that I would ask is, what word describes civic space currently in your country right now? Using the code, you can enter the Slido and then just fill in with your answers. Hopefully everyone is able to join. I see some people are typing already. So I'll just give it a moment. Shrinking. Absolutely, that is something we see and we hear every day. Uncertainty is under threat. If you are not able to enter the Slido, please feel free to also share it in the chat. So you're welcome to do that as well. We see that it's backsliding. It is resilient. That's absolutely true, because while we are, under tough circumstances, civil society is resilient and civil society is pushing back. So it's good to see that it being resilient is something that is popping up as well. Civil society is vital. That is absolutely, absolutely true. So those are the words we're seeing. Phoenixing. I am super curious and would love to hear more about that. But yes, it is stifling. It is repressed. But it's under siege. Yes. I see it's radicalized. I can't see my full screen for some reason. It's towards democracy, uncertainty. It's searching space, politically based, biased, sorry. Repressed. So still the top three is shrinking, repressed, and resilient. It's good to see that there is some hope despite the shrinking civic space. It's skewed by state intervention, politically biased, politicized. It is evolving. Non-existent. Anti-gender movement, it is closing and uninclusive. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, and I hope that during our discussions with the panelists, we are able to delve more and deeper into some of the thoughts that you have around civic space in your country, and you are able to kind of delve deeper into some of these thoughts. For just considering time, I'll move on to the next question. The next question then is, sorry, I can't see my screen here. Oh, here we go. What is the biggest challenge in communicating positive civic narratives in your context? You are welcome to select more than one option. So please let us know whether it's and disinformation, limited media freedom, it's the fear of backlash and safety concern, is it the lack of capacity and or support?
Or if it's something else, please feel free to put it in the chat. For folks who didn't know what phoenixing is a bird who rose from its own ashes. So it's basically a rebirth or re-energizing of something that's been, well, civic space is not dead, but Phoenix died and he rose from his own ashes.
So a large percentage is saying the fear of backlash and safety concerns. And then second, we are seeing mis and disinformation also coming up of actually they've come up together, and then lack of capacity and support, and then limited access to media freedom, and then communication resources towards the end. So that is also good to note. And then we'll move on to the last question that we have. If we could reshape public narratives about civil society, what would you want people to feel or believe? So here you are welcome to type in a few words, maybe 5 words maximum, maybe that would give us a sense of what you would want us to share. So we have their power. You'd want people to believe and feel their power. You'd want people to feel new. They need to feel a safe space, absolutely. That civil society works for ordinary people. And that is so important because a lot of the times we do work within our own sector and work with each other, but people need to know that we exist. There needs to be visibility, and they need to know that we are working for them and with them. People need to feel agency. They need to feel equal. They need to believe in just humanity. They need to feel gratitude. They need to feel freedom, unlimited possibility to change. The time it takes for change to take effect. Yes, there needs to be a lot of patience in the process. They need to feel community, hope, safety, and respect. And they also need to feel that the LGBTQIA that just disappeared people also exist. That is true. They need to feel empowered, and there needs to be collective action. I'll just wait and see if there's anything. Safety and integrity. They'll need to feel necessity. Thank you so much for your thoughts. I'll stop sharing this segment, but this poll and this questionnaire will continue to be open. So please feel free to continue adding your thoughts while we continue with the conversation with the panelists. So I will move on to the next section of the agenda, which is our panel discussion. And so I'm very excited and very happy to introduce our panelists for today. Let's just have my, nope, keeps happening. Where are we here? All right. All right, so today we are happy to have our panelists from within Civicus, but also our partners that we work closely with. And, you know, based on our conversations, we know that narratives are not just stories, right? They shape how people see themselves and others, and also their role in civil society. So today we'll be hearing from our colleagues and partners who work across communications, activism, advocacy, and creativity to explore how we can build narratives that expand civic space. We will ask them a few questions, and then we'll also open the floor for your questions. Please feel free, as the conversation is happening, to share your questions in the chat, but we'll also have an opportunity for you to unmute and then ask questions. So just as an introduction, firstly, we have Raylin De La Paz, who is our advocacy and communications lead at Civicus. Ray leads the advocacy and campaigns cluster of Civicus and ensures the implementation of advocacy and campaign actions and projects in different regions in coordination with Civicus members, partners, and other clusters. Before Civicus, Ray worked for children's rights, gender equality, humanitarian, good governance, and anti-corruption organizations and projects in the Philippines and in the Asia-Pacific region, as well as globally. And then we have Jocelyn Villarreal. Jocelyn is a communications specialist with over 10 years of experience supporting international organizations in strategic communications and content development. She is passionate about fostering active digital communities and has experience in user-generated digital communications. Her work focuses on increasing engagement and enhancing brand recognition through purposeful and inclusive storytelling. And then next we have Takaedza Tafire. Taka serves as the program coordinator for the Civicus Freedom of Peaceful Assembly workstream. In this role, he oversees the coordination of the FOPA, so Freedom of Peaceful Assembly, shortened, we call it FOPA. Civicus loves acronyms, by the way. So Taka oversees the coordination of the FOPA Global Resource Hub, the Re-Rise initiative, which you might be familiar with, and the Protest Lab. Taka is passionate about democracy, rights, and governance, innovation, boasting extensive experience in leading initiatives to establish social justice, innovation hubs. He excels in facilitating design thinking processes, promoting locally led development, and facilitating election monitoring. He is currently based in Zimbabwe. And then we have Nipuna Kumbalatara, Nipuna joined Civicus in early 2023. Inspired by its commitment to promoting civic action, he's a firm believer of freedom of expression as a precondition to both achieving progress and human rights. Nipuna brings over 15 years of experience in shaping narratives, enabling people's movements, and campaigning for positive change. He's led media and communications work from grassroots to international levels, working for Oxfam, Earth Rights UN, the UN Civil Society and media partners. He is originally from Sri Lanka and is currently based in Portugal. So I'll stop sharing now and we can go into the discussion with our panelists. I welcome you to switch on your camera so everyone can see you as we discuss. And I also welcome anyone who's online to share their questions in the chat in the meantime, and we'll come back to them in a bit. So I'll start with Ray. Ray, you've led campaigns across different social issues. What have you learned about designing advocacy narratives that not only inform but emotionally connect stories that people see themselves in?
Yeah, thank you so much, Tanya, and I'm so happy to be here with everyone. I'm enjoying the conversation and I'm learning a lot. I think the first thing that we should remember is to meet the people where they are. So that's what I always keep in mind. When we say meet the people where they are, it talks about their lived experience. So for instance, when I was in Plan International, when we were doing a campaign against child early and forced marriage in the region, it would be easy to just make a call about ending child early and forced marriage. That should have been easy. But when you want to make the campaign more effective, what we had to do is to conduct a series of consultations. We need to know our audience really well. But it's not just knowing our audience, like who they are, what is their demographic, etc., but really meeting where they are. So meaning if we want to invite people to be part of a certain campaign or an action, we need to understand, for instance, will our call to action be practical for them? Like if we want parents, mothers to be part of the campaign on child early and forced marriage, but they are busy taking care of their families, etc., and we invite them to join us in protests, or we invite them to join us in our, legislative advocacy, to go to Congress, etc., that will not be possible for them. So it's important that we know our audience, their lived experience, where they are, and it's also important to know and to be sensitive about culture. I cannot overemphasize it, probably because I've worked a lot in different regions, heavily on Asia, and Asia in itself is very culturally diverse, as you can imagine. So as I said, like I go back to that example where we had our campaign on child early and forced marriage. We had to recognize that in some culture, child early and forced marriage is allowed and actually legal and consistent with their religious belief. So to say and to rally people, to call for ending of child early and forced marriage, of course, that remains our call, but it has a lot of nuances, especially when we go to different communities, because we have to understand our culture. What the last thing that we want to do when we do our campaign is to offend the communities that we work with. But that's not to say that we will not call for ending of child early and forced marriage anymore. But the language is nuanced, the call to action is nuanced, that is sensitive to their culture, that recognizes their lived experience, that recognizes their reality, that also recognizes what's most practical for them. So I go to my next point, which is about language. That is really, really, really important. We have our own jargons, Tanya, as you said, like even in Civicus, like we use our own jargon. Civil society, we love our jargons. We talk about sustainability, we talk about intersectionality, diversity, etc., etc. And sometimes it's so easy for us to assume that our audience understand it the way that we do. But when you go and talk to them and you have these conversations with them, you realize that they don't understand the language that we speak. And sometimes these are the language that mistakenly we use in our campaigns. So it relates to meeting people where they are. I think what's fundamental here is the discipline of really knowing your audience. Sometimes it's so easy for us to think of a tagline, to come up with an advocacy agenda, or to design a campaign strategy. But it takes a lot of discipline. And I always say this as an advocacy person. Sometimes when you look at advocacy, the symbol that's always used is a megaphone, which is right because we speak a lot, But I think, and I believe 50% of effective advocacy and campaign is actually listening. It's not speaking. And I think that's what's required when we want to do effective advocacy and campaign. So part of meeting people where they are is also realizing what matters to them. So when I had a chance to work on countering anti-rights and anti-gender narratives when I was in Plan International Global Hub, what I kept asking myself is that why are these anti-narratives resonating with the public? And if you dig deeper, you will realize that it's because they're able to campaign on or use narratives that matter to the public. Religion, family protection, cultural protection, etc. So they frame human rights as, or gender equality or gender diversity as threats to their families, which in general matter to all of us, especially in Asia, for instance. We're highly familial, and I know that in many other regions, it's also the same. So when they frame human rights as a threat to family, of course, they will do everything to protect their families because it's what matters to them. They also frame gender equality and gender diversity as a form of ideological colonization. And in many cultures, they will protect their cultural integrity. How do you call it? Like they will do everything to protect it. So anything that will threaten their cultural identity, they will be up in arms, and really stand up against it. So what I realized that it's so easy. It's also very relatable. So let's say I worked a lot also on queer rights, and they would say that when you expose your children to gender diversity, LGBTQIA plus rights, you're exposing your children to promiscuity, And as a mother or as parents, that's not something that you would want. And for some reason, it resonates to them. But of course, it's coupled a lot with misinformation and disinformation. So of course, that's what That's the main tool that they used, to propagate this kind of false narratives against gender equality and human rights. But there's something there that, that we can learn from, which is them knowing what matters to the people, speaking it in a very simple language, using the language that people speak, and meeting people where they are. Unfortunately, there's a lot to learn from the anti-rights movements. But I'm not saying that this hasn't been done by many civil society organizations also in other parts of the world. But I think this is something that we can go back to. It's really knowing our audience where they are, what matters to them, what's the language that they speak, what is the best way to communicate to them, and there's also a clear call to action. So it's also, something practical. You don't invite people to a campaign, and tell them like to draft like this manifesto, et cetera, but you are in a community where people, are not exposed, to these kinds of strategies, or having a hard time to access, education, so they could not, write these things. Just an example. So the clear to action is also something that's clear, practical, etc. So when we know what matters to them and we come up with a campaign, we will know why this campaign would matter to me. So why would I get involved in Stand as My Witness campaign? Like when we talk about human rights, it's still to me, very abstract. It's still very conceptual. So what I always encourage people is when we talk about human rights, even civic space, let's unpack it. What does it mean for people in their daily lives? When we talk about human rights, we actually talk about access to education for your children, access to health, like better access to health for your family members. When we talk about an open civic space, it talks about safety and effective governance, etc. I know that there's a lot to analyze, but I think there's also a way for us to be able to unpack it. And I think when we do campaign, these things to me, I found like very fundamental and really important. So that's a discipline, for us advocates and campaigners. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ray. I was going to follow up the question with, wanting to know what, how you can develop a campaign that inspires empathy and action. But I think within your response, you did speak to that, and having an understanding of who you're communicating with, who their values are, what their values are, and what is most important to them, and therefore they'll resonate with the campaign, and that will inspire their action. So thank you so much for sharing. Yes.
Can I just quickly add something, Tanya, which is also important? I think it's also the accuracy of information that we give, with the proliferation of disinformation, we can say like anti-rights narratives, they resonate with the people, etc. But again, the flip side of that is that they build on like lies and these false narratives. So for us, civil society, how will we be able to relate to our audience, to our partners, to communities, using accurate and reliable information? So I think that's also something important. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ray. I will, in the interest of time, I'll move on to our next panelist, and we'll continue this conversation and just touch on Ray's thoughts. So please, if you have any questions for Ray, please put them in the chat. And so I'll just move on quickly to Taka. I also see a couple of hands raised. Just keep them there, and we'll come back to you in a moment. Taka, you work a lot in your work with the FOPA work stream on protest. And so, the question that we wanted to know from you is, when we talk about protests, the narratives around protests are not only shaped by what they are, but how people perceive them. So we also want to know from your work and your work at FOPA and the Protest Lab initiative, how do narratives influence whether movements are seen as being legitimate or they are seen as threatening?
Thanks, Tanya, and hello, everyone. So I would start by saying these few statements, probably just to build a picture in everyone's mind. The first thing that I would say is that in most Islamic countries, protests they are deemed as fitina, something that causes division. They are called as un-Islamic in some of the Islamic countries. If you check on the story of Nepal, the recent story where young people managed to effect some change, those youngsters were deemed as hooligans, people who vandalize property, people who vandalize buildings, and who are retrogressive. If you check if you look at the case of Kenya, the recent one, they reject the finance bill. Young people were called agents of foreign agents of regime change, puppets of the West. So from our experience as the FOPA work stream together with the FOPA allies, we have come to realize that what makes protest legitimate or threatening is not really the acts of protesting, but how the story is being told, especially narratives by the powerful. And when I'm talking about the powerful, I'm not only talking about the people in government, but I want also to include other leaders in the community, to include religious leaders, because religious leaders have played a very pivotal role in this discussion because they have influence. For example, in the issue that I mentioned, where protests are deemed as un-Islamic, in Iran, these were the imams, these were the clerics who were pushing this narrative. So you realize that they are also key actors. So I think who is pushing the narrative, who is telling the story, plays a pivotal role. We have seen in most cases that the government also uses the law to legitimize the narrative. And the narrative then shapes if really protests are going to be perceived as legitimate or threatening. I'll give a good example. In Nigeria, they have what they call the anti-terrorism law, the law that really regulates every activity on assembly, but with the focus of trying to mitigate terrorism. The government pushes a story that we are trying to avoid terrorism, but in real essence, they're trying to avoid or trying to suppress every action that can threaten their power. So what they do in crafting those laws, they leave them vague or they leave them weak in a manner that they can interpret them to their own favor. And in the case of a protest movement, it becomes difficult to tell if the action is legitimate or not, because it is the government that then has the power to interpret the law using the captured courts. So that is another issue. The other issue is also the role of media and other storytellers in this context. I want to mention the issue of disinformation. So on the issue of disinformation, I want to give a good example of the 2019 Iraq and Lebanon protests, where really the governments of the countries were pushing a narrative that the protests were there to undermine the credibility of the government, and these were traitors. You know, when the government pushes that narrative that protesters are traitors, they are building a narrative that delegitimize protest movements. So that is another way that we've seen this happening. But what is also key to mention is that power is very important in this conversation, because we've seen also that protests that don't really threaten political power are often regarded as legitimate, as compared to protests that really threaten political power. For example, protests against corruption, protests against maybe a draconian law or a repressive law, a protest maybe for free and fair elections. Governments, they really try their level best to make sure that those protests are not successful. Protests or assemblies by opposition political parties, they are suppressed. They are called terrorism acts. It is because they threaten political power. But we have seen also protests that are really less political, though they're political by design, because every protest is political by design. But if they don't threaten political power and just threaten maybe change of the status quo in terms of social setup, sometimes they are called legitimate. I'll talk about the protests. Sometimes those are on anti-child marriages, because they don't really threaten political power that much. They were given a space. And so it's really about who is telling the story, whose power is being threatened. Those really are essential things to consider when you are looking at how protests are perceived, whether as legitimate or as threatening. So all these are shaped on those things of who is telling the story and whose power is being threatened. Because of time, maybe I can end here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tuck. And I think you shared a lot of insights, and we see in the comments that people are curious to know about some of the instances and some of the laws that you have mentioned. And you mentioned how important it is and the power lies in who is telling the narrative. So as civil society and, you know, those who advocate for citizen action, what narratives can we shape that will counter, that will build empathy and will also inspire action? So could you maybe briefly share what narratives you think would be important for us to shape our own narratives and also counter the resistance?
Thanks, Tanya. So I'll mention maybe 4 things or 3 for now. I think we need to push more positive narratives. We need to frame our protests and the stories that we tell on protests to be more positive. For example, I'll mention maybe the Sudan case of 2019, the 2019 Sudan revolution. Women who were really pushing for gender equality did not frame the protest as our suffering. Instead, they said our dignity, because positivity psychologically attracts people to join the movement. So we need to be intentional about how we frame, check on how successful was Me Too movement. So we need to look at the positive side and frame our protests or our movements or our narratives in a very positive way to influence a positive outcome. This could be a positive outcome in terms of mass mobilization. This could be a positive outcome in terms of how they are perceived. This could be a positive outcome in terms of realizing the intended goal. The other thing that I can also maybe add that is very critical is also to add the element of creativity. You know, the recent movements that we have seen being led by Gen Zs that are successful are really anchored on creativity. Narratives that are built on creativity usually thrives. The Black Lives Matters, the bad governance hashtags, the TikTok videos that you've seen being propped in Kenya, you know, what we've seen happening in Venezuela, how they were using visuals, you know, all those things, they tell another story in a very creative way that can actually invite the audience to really follow and support the movements. So creativity is something that really pushes also narratives or pushes also the cause of protest in a very positive way that we can yield better results. The other thing that I can mention is also the issue of hope campaigns. You know, oftentimes we speak of the dark side of protest. I looked at the last slide that we shared. You know, what was on top of the list was the shrinking of the civic space. I deliberately had to add the phoenixing, because the phoenix has the ability to thrive. It does not die permanently. It actually adapts, it evolves, it copies with the environment. It has that creativity in it. So we need also to start to talk about, to frame our things with hope in mind. For example, the protest lab. The protest lab, we don't talk much about resilience. We talk so much about pro-resilience. I think Rubens knows how we crafted this terminology when we were in Abuja. Pro-resilience is to talk about positivity, to talk about preventative solutions. So we need to start to craft positive narratives that brings hope. That the last thing that I can just say is humor. You know, it's very important to add humor in our narratives. You know, the civic space for long has become a very too serious space. In becoming too serious, we have lost connect with the communities because we've used a lot of jargon. And I loved it when you mentioned one of your learnings in Latin America, Tanya, you mentioned that we need to use the language that resonates with the communities. So we need to also start to separate the jargons and simplify and add humor. For example, I remember the other time there was a protest, I can't remember the country, but it is in Africa, where people started to say we are not going to disperse unless you think of killing us, but we can only disperse if Netflix releases a good movie. So, you know, it's like people started to laugh, so they think only Netflix movie can then disperse them, so these policemen cannot. Humor was added in the cause. And whenever there's humor, people can endure the struggle. People can endure the pain. I remember another time when we were arrested with my friends when we were in prison, when we were interviewed, like, tell us your best, tell us about your experience. We say that we didn't know that the prison can give you enough time to read and write. So we think that if we are to be good writers, maybe we need to retreat into prisons. There's free food, free accommodation, and free time to write. And people loved about it, and people started, and that was also something that started to build a headline. So we need to start to add humor in our cause to connect with the people, because without fun, there's limited endurance. Yes, maybe I can end here for now.
Thank you so much, Taka. And I think those are some great insights that we can carry through, especially the humor part. I'm someone who loves to laugh. So I think when there are tough times, it is important to always see the spotlights and the bright lights and how we can move forward. I will move on to Jocelyn. Jocelyn, Ray mentioned, data that we need to have in order to drive our campaigns, right? We need to have that information. It needs to be evidence-based, the information that we share. And Taka also spoke, about the creativity that we need. So from your experience as a digital communications expert, how do we shape narratives and how do we communicate narratives that are evidence-based, but also have the creativity to be able to drive engagement and connect with various diverse audiences?
Hi, Tanya. Hi, all. Well, I think that when we are building narrative and storytelling to share with our audience, we need to keep in mind that both data and histories come together, because the data is what is telling us what is matter, and the histories take the data to tell us why this data, this information matters. So these are the things that come together when we're building this narrative, and we are taking also, as Taka mentioned, we are taking those data and humanize that information and bring up the histories behind the data. So we have I don't know, we can see tools like the Civic Monitor, and we can find in there a lot of data, a lot of information, but behind all the data, we find a lot of information, a lot of histories, but that not come together. And when we tell those history, but also bring up the data, we also can bring or share a dimension of the impact of those histories we are building on those narratives. So those are two things that come together. So it's important to see the histories behind. So it's a way we can relate and make people really understand what is happening and bring all that information down in a way that we can understand. But it's also when we use data and we create those histories, like, well, keeping also in mind that, well, this probably is not a single history, but it's also is happening, have other repercussions that we need to support with those data. So are those things that come together.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn. And I think an additional question, and something that we have noted is that as civil society organizations, we do have a lot of data, we do have a lot of information that we're monitoring and tracking, and we do publish it. But sometimes it can be difficult for us to translate that to an audience that is not privy to that information, that doesn't have context. So how do we create content that can share that data in a more accessible way and that is also engaging? Do you have any thoughts or suggestions on how, our partners can craft messages in more accessible ways?
Yeah, of course, it's a challenge because we, of course, when we want to share we experience, our work as organization, we are dealing with history that are very complex, and sometimes we want to use digital space to share those histories. But I think I will bring up again something that was mentioned before, that is simplifying this information, because it's part of what that mission of amplifying our message, that we need to really focus on be simple, but not that doesn't need to mean that we'll forget the nuance or the details and the authenticity of those histories we are sharing. But we need to also keep in mind the audience we want to reach, and bring all that histories in a format that is also understandable for the people we want to talk. So I think that the key thing is simplifying. So it's a way that we can ensure that we can connect with our audience. And now, well, when we are talking about digital space, we have to go through trying to understand algorithms, search engines, and now we are also dealing with generative engines and AI. So we also have to keep all those things in mind when we are building narrative, when we are sharing histories, and we have that objective of amplifying those messages. So I think simplifying is a key thing when we are working and when we are communicating, so we can make sure that our message persists on those digital spaces and can reach many people as possible in those digital spaces.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn. And I encourage anyone who's with us today, if you have any specific questions, in terms of communicating social media, digital communications, to please share your questions, and Jocelyn will be happy to respond to that. So Nipuna, you are last on my list as a panelist, but we've heard a lot from our panelists today, and in interest of time, I will not ask you many questions. I will ask you to just tell us, when we at Civicus, we talk a lot about shifting narratives and shifting mindsets. But what does this mean in practical terms when we want to see an outcome and we want to see change? What are we hoping to see? And what role does empathy as well as psychology play in this? And if you could just, or maybe talk about some of your highlights or some campaigns that you have been part of or experienced that you think show this change that we are looking to see.
Thanks, Tanya. Radin answered a lot of those questions, so I don't have anything to say. I'm kidding. But yeah, Ray was right, and also Ruben's answered quite a bit of that, but I want to go a little bit deeper. Ray talked about focusing on the audiences and kind of like really, when we say audiences, we got to be careful in designing a campaign. Who do we want to shift the minds of? Who do we want to shift the conversations of? Who do we want to shift the beliefs of, and or the actions of, right? And when we are thinking about them, Ray highlighted the idea of culture and the narratives that are created by media and the other actors there. We really gotta, instead of just saying, okay, this is the audience, we gotta get into what their cultural stories are. And again, Taka mentioned hope a little bit. I think it's always very difficult when you're in a negative kind of when you build a counter narrative or a conflicting narrative, it's always problematic because it always antagonizes people. So what we should try to do is try to find hope-based narratives. For example, if you talk about religion, there's the idea of acceptance across all of the religions. There's the idea of compassion or empathy or support across all the religions. And some religions do also have democratic values. So we can think about how to tap into those when we are creating this story, and not try to counter or go against the beliefs held by people. Now, I make a distinction, right? If you are countering Donald Trump or Narendra Modi or someone like Javier Milei, we can speak out very strongly to them. But the people who support them don't necessarily buy into the entire cohort of values that Modi brings. For example, so when I was working in Asia with Oxfam, we worked with YouGov, and we had this probably one of the largest research projects that's done in the sector. And we found, even if you look at BJP supporters, now to clarify, our audience was young and digitally engaged people. We found that about 50% of the people who actually supported BJP were for human rights, for equality, for climate justice, and women's rights. And that's 50% of BJP supporters. They voted for Modi not because they necessarily believed his values. They voted for him for other reasons. And one of the reasons is Modi is very good at kind of co-opting narratives and co-opting people to kind of create a positive framework. So they play to the audience really well. And I think that's something what Trump does. So if you've heard about Charlie Kirk's death, but it's something that he was also very good at. They kind of create a narrative that really fits the audience, and kind of then they add the kind of lies and the disinformation and the power dynamics to carry it forward. Obviously, we got to be authentic as the sector. We cannot lie. We shouldn't lie. We shouldn't create harmful narratives. We shouldn't create violence or conflict. So we got to be a little bit more careful, but we really got to tap into the stories that people believe, whether it comes from religion, whether it comes from culture, whether it comes from institutions, and really connect with them at an emotional level where they can trust and believe us. Another thing that I think all of the speakers and all of us understand what I'm saying, but when it comes to doing them, we don't. And that's a huge problem. And someone typed in the kind of the comments earlier that change takes time, and that is very true. So we talk about shifting narratives, right? It takes time to shift narrative, particularly if you are engaging a group of people who don't buy into our stories, who don't trust us, and so on. Again, going back to that piece of research, and you can also look at Edelman Barometer. You can see the civil society and NGOs are not really well trusted by the publics. And this is also true in the local level where I've been engaged in research in different countries. So that creating that trust is really important. Creating that trust takes time. Creating that trust takes listening. Creating that trust takes continuous engagement and to have like a meaningful change. I want to touch, and why we don't do it really is oftentimes we are on time pressure. Project has a deliverable. We are familiar with the different tools. And Rubens talked about embracing uncertainty. In psychology, there's this concept of, in social psychology, there's this concept of uncertainty avoidance. Some cultures are more uncertainty avoidant. That was obviously looking at ethnicities and nationalities, but I think as a sector, the non-governmental organizations and civil society is quite uncertainty avoidant. So we've kind of got to challenge that. We've got to kind of embrace openness in a broader way. I know time's running short, but there's one more point I want to make, which is we just can't talk to people like us and expect change to happen. Again, people like Charlie Kirk or Jordan Peterson, they're not saints, but what they did was they spoke to people who usually the anti-rights movement didn't talk to, and they, if you look at particularly Jordan Peterson's initial conversations, it was kind of supporting a group of people, in which case, his case, it was men. And then he moved on to the political ideology later. So the lesson here is cut out all the lies and fear-based narratives that they do, but they connected with people who they don't usually connect with. And I think that's a really important thing. We got to reach out. And the Democracy Day campaign that we had, the cohort created really strong message on listening and engaging with people who have different beliefs and who aren't like us. So I really think that it's important to that cut across, because the world is so polarized right now. We need to, in our narratives, create more trust, more belonging, and find common ways to progress. Like, again, when we did that research project, even people who were considered nationalists believed in, to a large degree, on equality, economic, gender, and also climate justice. So we need to talk to more people, engage, and find ways to connect our stories together, to create really strong narratives. And let's get out of our comfort zone and get into the zones of people who are out there really struggling with different issues. And that's the sense of empathy we must foster when we are thinking of narratives from the beginning to the end.
Thank you so much, Nipuna. And I'm sorry that we can't get into a deeper conversation due to time. But for those who want to continue engaging, we do encourage you to get in touch with us, and we can have spaces for more conversation like these. And I think there's a couple of questions, and I'm thankful for the panelists, because I see you've already been answering the questions that have come up. So just one last question that was asked, which was for I think it said for the second speaker, I think it was Pallavi, if I'm Pallavi. You had a question about, for the second speaker, in the context of simplifying jargons in legal spaces, what are some of the participatory ways to inducing sharing jargon-less knowledge, legal knowledge, with masses that work? And the answer that was shared by our panel was that collective discovery journey. So designing and run campaigns with the people. Communities have voices, let them tell their stories, just support them. And we need active citizens and not celebrity activists. So I think the answer there is understanding the language that people use and that they speak. And when you are driving your campaigns, using the same languaging that resonates with them. So I was going to ask one final question, but maybe I'll let the panel just give me, I want one sentence only. We have no time. My IT team is telling me that this call is going to cut. So the last question I'll ask our panel just to close off is that if we want to reshape the narrative about civil society, what is the one thing, and just the one thing from each of you, that we need to prioritize? Jocelyn, please go ahead first.
Of course, yeah. Well, I think it's very important what you just mentioned, and listen to people and connect with them, because at the end is with them we want to, we are doing this work for them and for give them visibility. So it's important we are connecting with their voice. If not, it's not going to happen.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Nipuna?
Sorry, what's the question? I was responding to another question online.
If we want to reshape the narrative about civil society, what is the one thing, just one thing, that we need to prioritize?
Let's connect with people, more people who aren't really like us, and engage more across diverse groups of people and have conversations.
Thank you, Nipuna. Taka?
We need to be more intentional and consistent. Yes.
Yes, I love it. Short and simple. I love it. Ray, please.
For me, we need to be more practical. Yeah. So human rights is practical. The work of civil society is practical. It's something that you can really touch and hold and can change your lives. And put forward more stories of hope. I think it's been said across the by the different speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ray. Thank you, Taka. Thank you, Nipuna, and thank you, Jocelyn. And thank you for sharing your insights. I hope I've learned a lot, and I hope everyone has too. And we welcome you as part of our community, those who are with us today, to also share your insights. We'd love to learn from you. But because we have 5 minutes left on the call, I will jump on to the next steps about the Communicators for Civic Action. We had some questions earlier on about what we are planning on doing next. So Nipuna and I will just quickly delve into that. But I thank the speakers and the panelists for being part of this journey with us and sharing your insights. Okay. Yeah, so we do have questions that have been posed, and I know Nipuna's responding to some, and the panelists have been responding to others. But we do welcome more questions, and when after the call, we can respond and communicate via email. We can schedule a call, so on. But yeah, what is happening next with the Communicators for Civic Action? So there will be continuous engagement and learning and collaboration. As we did with our Latin America cohort, we continue engaging, we continue building narratives, we continue creating campaigns together, and also amplifying the stories that come from, it's not full out. We're amplifying the stories that come from their local context. And then also in turn, we also share the resources, the analysis, and the research that comes from our Civicus teams, and ensuring that that information is able to be filtered down to grassroots activists. They have that evidence that they need to back their campaigns. And so we'll continue doing that. And then in terms of practical next steps and logistics, after the Latin America convening, we will be having one in Asia, and we're looking to do this in early of next year. So we have tentatively selected January as the date for that. We are currently in the process of identifying partners and people that would be part of this network. We do intend on having a larger network that will engage and co-create content and build narratives for the region. But at the same time, we'll have a smaller group of people that will go to the in-person convening. So that process is already taking shape, and we are going to be sharing more about that as we progress. And then we do intend on having an Africa cohort, but right now the focus is on the Asia cohort. So later next year or mid next year, we'll start then the process of building our Africa cohort. And then we're looking at the end of our journey in 2028 to bring together all the various cohorts that we built and all of the members that have been part of the journey, and bringing them together for a global cohort. I might just want to add that we will continue having these open spaces on a quarterly basis. So just please keep a lookout for more information as we continue building narratives for civil society, positive narratives for civil society. We will continue having these open calls where anyone can join and share their insights. And so before I close off, I just want to thank you all for being part of this, and thank you for joining us. I know it was a long session. If you do want to get in touch with us, please feel free to contact us at narratives@civicus.org. I'll be the one who responds to you, so please feel free to just say, hey, Tanya, I'd like to get in touch, and I'll be happy to connect with you. Let me stop sharing. We have 3 minutes. And I think there was one hand raised. Chinedu, perhaps you'd want to come in. Okay, I think Chinedu might have raised their hand earlier on. But yeah, if you have any questions for us, please do write to us. We'd be happy to hear from you. And if there's any additional thoughts outside of this meeting that you want to share, we'd be happy to learn from you as well. Yeah, thank you to our panelists, thank you to our IT team, and thank you to our interpreters. Nipuna, any last words?
There's the International Civil Society Week happening in the first week of November. Please do check out the Civicus website and the website if you'd like to join in person or online. There's There were hundreds of propositions for narrative media and communications related panels. We would announce what was selected, but please do engage. I do see some questions here, and in the chat again, like Tanya said, if you didn't get the answers, please contact us on narratives@civicus.org and we'll get back to you. Some of the questions were very specific. I saw one around M23, and then I saw a couple of others as well. So these are very specific ones. Please reach out to us and let's have a discussion.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day further. Wishing you all the best, and let's continue shaping and promoting positive narratives for civil society.